This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast. Hi, it's Al. Welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. This one's called Who's the Boss? You know, film sets are really fascinating places to work. They definitely reflect the nature of the people working on them, especially at the top. But who's really in charge of any set? Most sets are kind of like beehives. They look that way, they kind of feel that way too. And while everyone thinks the director is Queen Bee, on the set itself, it's really the first assistant director who's running the joint. Now, they're not the boss. They work for the boss. If it's a feature film, the boss is the director. But if it's a TV show, the bosses are the writer-producers. The first works for them. The first is the person who's really responsible for getting every day's work done on time and on budget. That means when the shit hits the fan, the first person the shit's going to hit is the first. It's a hard job, and it requires a special kind of person. Like our friend Tony Adler, no relation to Gil. Now, as you'll hear, Tony and I go back a long, long way to the Vassar College Drama Department. Boy, do we have stories. Tony's had a long, amazing career. He's worked on some huge features, Ragtime, American Beauty. He's done TV series like Grace and Frankie, Heroes, Empire, and Halo. He's worked with pretty much everyone you've ever heard of. He's also learned how not to make a movie or a TV show or a miniseries. When you've done as much as Tony has, the odds are you're going to do a couple of stinkers. Want some great stories from the sets of movies and TV shows you love? Well, tune out the world for an hour and enjoy a little madness. Some of the best stories coming from any movie set happens on the set. And the first AD, like our good friend Tony, he knows them.
So how did you get into this nasty business? Let's start off with what mistakes you made to get into this business.
Well, now I know a little bit about Tony because we go back a bit. I know Tony from Vassar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't. So I don't know if you knew that, Gil.
I don't know if I knew that. I may have known it a long time ago, but
I've known Tony
with age,
longer,
I forgot a lot.
I've known Tony longer than I've known you.
Wow.
Yes. So Gil, if we do the math, we're looking at like 46 years.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah. It's true. 1970. I got to Vassar in 1977. And
I got to Vassar in 1976.
Yep.
And I'm still trying to get to Vassar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tony and I were both in the drama department. And so we were in the same crowd in the drama department. We worked on things together. We were part of a production in the handball courts of a production of T.S. Eliot's Sweeney Agonistes, directed by Neil Samuels.
Wow. You've got a really good memory, Alan.
It's a sad thing.
It is.
And I'm going to be like Mrs. Havisham, and just me and my fucking. That'll be great.
So Tony, what did you do on that production?
On Sweeney Agonistes?
Yes,
yeah.
We're finally talking about Sweeney Agonistes.
It's unbelievable. I was the lighting designer and set designer for Sweeney Agonistes at college.
Whose idea was it to put it in the handball court? Whose idea was that?
I think that came from one Jack Daniels driven evening between Neil Samuels and myself.
There you go. It was genius. It was so weird because the audience sat down in the court and we performed up in the little gallery and so there wasn't much space to work in up in the gallery. But it was really freaky looking because of the angle that the audience was watching us at, and it's a strange piece anyway. It's fragments.
So clearly, this didn't knock any sensibility into your head, as it did in Alan's as well, because he went into the business, as did you. So how did you get into being a first AD from that?
Well, Alan and I were, as he said, part of the theater department, and I think we both left college, me a year earlier than him, 1980, and he came out, Alan, 81. But I think we all clearly came out of college with the idea that we were going to be great successes in the theater industry. And so I left college in the summer of '80, and my father. I think Gil, you and I had talked about this at one point. My father was president of the Writers Guild for many on the East Coast for many years. So I kind of grew up in a house that was very familiar with filmmaking, TV, reading scripts, reading
Sure.
book. I mean, we were a big reading household.
Mhm.
And I came out of school with the idea that I was going to be a lighting and set designer on Broadway. That was where my head was going.
That's what you were going to be when you grew up.
Yeah, and I thought I was on my way. I mean, and I used to turn to all the guys that were in the department with us who all wanted to be actors, and I said, forget it. I'm never going to be. I mean, I may be funny, I may be good. You may have laughed at my performances. Great. I'm not going to go through the tragedy of trying to get turned down every day, all the time as an actor. So I'm going to stay with this
Did you ever go? Did you ever attempt one audition as an actor ever?
Nope, never did. Never bothered to do that because it didn't
Good for
go.
you.
Having that kind of, I mean, my Alan, you remember Joe Gardner and
Ooh,
and
good
our
for you.
old friend John Cantor, who is, left us. But I mean, to go through that depression of like constantly getting rejected and having to pick yourself up off the ground, I
Yeah.
didn't want to do any of that. That never interested me. To Gil's question, how did I get started? The summer that I graduated college, the summer of 1980, I left school when I graduated. I got a job almost immediately working as a master electrician in an off Broadway house, and I was working as a stagehand for another company called the Second Stage Theater Company in New York. So I was working and doing things, and my father one day while I was staying in New York called me up. They had gone to the country house for the summer, my parents, and he said, "Do you remember our old friend, the director Milos Forman?" And I said, "Yes, my father had known Milos for many years."
Nice
Mhm.
friend to have.
And he said, "Milos Forman is doing a movie called Ragtime." Um, Hence the poster behind where's my hand? There it is.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
it is.
That's the poster from Ragtime. And he said they're looking to hire people. And I said, Pop, honestly, like I've got two jobs and I'm helping my friend do this rock and roll thing and blah blah. He said, look, here's what you should do. You should go down and say hi to him on the set. They're building the set. The set's on 11th Street between Avenue A and B, and they're magnificent. All you got to do is go down and say hi. That's it. And I said, okay, well, what the hell? I'll go down and say hello. So I called his assistant, made an appointment. One day, I decided to take a walk down there and see them. And I will never. I mean, it's as clear in my head as it was the day that I did it. I turned the corner, I walked onto the set, and I saw the first AD slash producer, who is a wise old guy was just amazing, named Michael Hausman.
I was just going to say, yeah.
Yeah, Gil. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you either know him or know of him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was stand they were they, we were they were dressing hundreds of extras. They were fitting them on the street. There were several hundred guys rebuilding the front of the street. I mean, it was unbelievable what was going on. And I stood there and I said, I watched Hausman. This was a week before they started to shoot. I watched Hausman directing rehearsals and a whole bunch of things from a 8-foot step ladder. And I was absolutely, first of all, I was astonished by what was being built because I had never seen anything like that before.
Sure, sure.
And watching the way that he played sort of the maestro or conductor in the middle of everything, my brain went boom, and I said, I want to do that. That looks cool to me and like a lot of fun.
Huh.
And it really, I mean, I kid you not, that was the seminal moment of me deciding to say to the theater jobs, I will get to them when I do, but I'm going to concentrate on being a PA and figure out how I can get up that ladder. And that's really true. I mean, I kid you not. That is exactly how it happened for me.
So you
Did
worked on the
your
show? Did you work on that movie?
I did.
hmm,
I worked on it for months, and in fact, when I went up to I mean, my parents knew this guy Hausman for quite a while, because he was a local in the neighborhood, as were we.
hmm.
And I walked up to him and I said hello to Milos Forman, who was yelling at somebody in Czech, which was, like, I don't know what he's yelling about. It turns out, I found out later, that he was yelling to some guy about having a date with one of the extras or something, something bizarre. Uh, but I walked up to Hausman, and Hausman said, I have a job for you if you want it. And I said, what's the job? And he said, you're going to paint rooms in that tenement building, because we're going to turn them into dressing rooms for the actors. You're going to paint them, clean them, do all that stuff, and then we'll figure it out from there. And I said, how much does it pay? He said, $50 a day. And I said, sign me up. What do I have to do? Point me in the right direction.
Let me get my overalls. I'm ready.
Yeah. I'll go borrow a pair of gloves from somebody.
Did
And
did working on a feature change the way that you saw filmed entertainment? Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
I,
well, it gave. I mean, I had been on sets before, and I had been behind the scenes, like, for example, my father was the story editor on two TV shows in the 60s, which were very well known in New York. One of which was Burt Reynolds' first starring show, called The Hawk,
Hmm.
where he played a Native American Indian detective in New York.
Aye,
And
aye, the casting. Aye.
that was followed by one of the great cop shows that was filmed in New York, called NYPD, with Jack Warden, Frank Converse, and Robert Hooks. And so I had seen it before. I had watched things being made, but never had I really been on the other side of the camera as part of the staff.
Yes.
So it really changed everything. From then on, every time I've gone to the movies since my day one, life has changed.
Yeah.
Like, my perception of it has changed. And actually, I think, realistically, it's made my movie going experience, for lack of a better term, way better for me. Like, I'll go watch excuse me, but I will go and watch anything.
No.
Doesn't matter what it is. I will go and sit there and figure it out and go, this is great. Like, I go watch cartoon movies, Shrek, the Minions. Like, I could go to a Minions movie. If they churned them out once a week, I would go every week. I mean, I love them. So, yeah, it really changed everything in that was spinning in my head. That one day standing there,
It's
just
profound. It is profound. Okay, so you found a home inside this business that you didn't expect to find.
yeah. And you know what? I'll tell you something else, Alan. You'll probably remember there was a guy at Vassar who taught filmmaking,
Stedman?
and his name was Ken Ross.
Oh,
And
Ken Ross. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
yeah,
Ken Ross.
and I took filmmaking my junior year, and he and I did not get along. He was an experimental filmmaker. He was like,
That was the
well,
whole department. Yes, Stedman also, who ran the department. It was all experimental.
here, point the camera at a cloud for 4 hours and see what happens. Like, I know what's going to happen. The cloud's going to go away, and then it's going to come back, and that's that. So I'm not.
Were you always a drama major?
Yeah.
See, I started a film major. I began as a film major, but the experimental stuff just wasn't that interesting to me, and I thought I'd rather be a drama major instead. The whole. I appreciate it in an esoteric sense, their kind of filmmaking, but I was more interested in narrative and telling stories.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that at that time when we went to school in the late 70s, experimental filmmaking was exactly that. Like, it was, let's see if we turn the 16 millimeter film around backwards, and then we spill some orange juice on it. maybe something really cool will happen.
Everyone
And
wanted to be Warhol.
yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, for me, that was like, no, sorry, I don't, whatever, you know.
So
Um,
But you know, having the good fortune, and I never worked with him, but I know of Michael, and I think he knows of me, but we've never really worked together. Having the
mhm.
good fortune of working with Michael and with Milos is really exceptional. I mean, and
Yeah,
that would set you on a course, at least in the right direction, having had experience with these right people who know what they're doing.
yeah. I will tell you, if you guys don't mind, I'll share one other story about that movie with you, which was also seminal and happened on that day that I went down there to visit them. Which I went down there about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was about a 10-minute walk from my house. And I met with Mike, and I watched Milos jump up and down and yell and check and smoke his cigar at 11 o'clock in the morning and blah blah blah. But and I hung around, and Mike Hausman had introduced me to a couple of people and whatever. And about 1:30 in the afternoon, there was a big hubbub. They were fitting all the Hasidic Jews that were going to be on the set. So they were fitting them with payas and the hat and the prayer shawls and the long coats and the whole thing. So there was a big commotion at the other end of the street where all these guys were being fitted. So I kind of wandered down there and to see what was going on, and all of a sudden, I saw this little hunched over guy in a wearing a bowler hat and a dark coat, trailed by a nurse, and he had an oxygen. And I realized who it was. It was Jimmy Cagney.
oh
Wow.
gosh, oh yeah, he was really, that was his last
That
anything
was
he did.
the last movie, and he had come down to visit the set with his nurse and his keepers, and there were some paparazzi there, and they were taking things. And I had grown up in my house with my parents being and like James Cagney was a movie icon.
Right.
Mm.
We watched Yankee Doodle Dandy twice a year without. I mean, we would take the phone off the hook and watch the movie because my mother would sing every single song
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
TV. So we watched. I'm standing there watching like this incredible persona that I grew up with. And he's 80 years old. He looks terrible. He's got an oxygen tube in his nose. There's a nurse trailing him around. And I was just, I couldn't even go up to him. But in watching what was going on, he wandered up to the Hasidic, some of the extras who were being fitted as Hasidic Jews.
Mm.
And James Cagney started to speak Yiddish.
Wow.
He started to speak Yiddish to these guys. And my jaw dropped, and one of the guys turned around, looked at him, and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Cagney, I don't speak Yiddish. I speak Spanish, but I don't speak Yiddish." And he kind of shook his head, and they sort of wandered off in the other direction. And I went away and I thought about it, and I realized, Jimmy Cagney had been raised on the Lower East Side,
Yeah.
and in those.
Irish neighborhood.
Well, but it was block by block on the Lower
Yeah.
East Side.
It
And
was.
so,
Yeah.
as a kid growing up at the turn of the century, you needed to know how to navigate
Sure.
different neighborhoods and different things. So of course he would know how to speak Yiddish, or
Mm.
or at least have a conversation. I'm sure he could speak Italian and German and something else.
Oh
Or
yeah, yeah.
Wow. And along the way, did you ever have an experience or an opportunity to meet with Frank Danielle?
Frank Danielle, no, the name rings a bell, but I don't
Frank
know.
Danielle was Milos's partner. They both came over from Czechoslovakia together, and then when Milos became head of drama at Columbia University,
Uh-huh.
he brought in Frank Danielle to run it.
Oh, okay. My father may have known Frank. I mean, I don't have a name for all of that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
So you stayed with it. So you suddenly got bitten by this thing, and now you suddenly have a couple of you're working on sets. You worked on Purple Rose of Cairo.
mhm.
Uh, what was that set like?
Well, Woody Allen sets. I did 3 Woody Allen movies. I worked on Zelig, I worked on The Purple Rose of Cairo, and I worked on Broadway Danny Rose.
Right.
3 very seminal Woody Allen movies from that time frame.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
didn't Michael work on those as well?
Houseman? No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no. Michael. There was a guy named somebody you might know, Gil. A guy named Michael Pizer.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
yeah, Mike Pizer was like the UPM line producer guy.
Yeah.
There was another guy who else you might know, Bobby Greenhut, Robert Greenhut. Do you
Oh
know
yeah.
Bobby?
Yeah.
So Bobby was like the guy. He
Yeah.
was the main guy
That's,
there. And there were other names I could reel off, but in answer to Alan's question, the Woody sets of that day were very uh, they were very regulated around Woody's behavior and his patterns and Mia Farrow and what was going on with them. So you had to be really like there was a specific way of working. So it was a little. It wasn't just like yuck yuck, run around, yell and scream and jump up and down kind of thing. It was
Never is.
well, there's a lot of forgiveness there, and especially back then in those days, there was a lot of forgiveness about shooting on the streets of New York, where a lot of I mean, you had to make a lot of noise and you had to move very fast in order to get things done.
yeah.
But the Woody sets were kind of like Marty Scorsese sets, which is they were very controlled. Woody was only called to the set when he was absolutely needed to shoot. Otherwise, the DP at the time, who was one of the great masters, Gordon Willis,
Yeah.
basically set up everything. Like when Woody would arrive on the set and go to his camper, Gordon would go walk in for 10 minutes, come out, and then do everything. And then Woody would come out just before we would shoot, generally with Mia Farrow if she was in the shot. And then we would go and he would shoot a couple of times. He would go up and talk to the actors a little bit. And that would be it. And when we would finish, he would go back to the trailer. Gordon would set up another shot and we would go on from there. So it was, and it was pretty clear that nobody was really supposed to talk to Woody unless he talked to you or it was the AD, a guy named Tom.
It's a strange set when that's kind of it's.
Yeah.
Uh,
But on the flip side of that, there was never any figuring out like how this was working. This was made clear pretty much. Don't talk to Woody unless he talks to you.
Sure.
We're going to do it like this. When he leaves the set, we have the set. When he comes on, everything is quiet. Boom, shoot, and then he goes away.
Masquerade is the first time that you are the second. Was that your first one?
No, there were a couple of others before it, but it was the first bigger film. It was the summer of '85 or '86 with and Rob Lowe was the biggest hot ticket in town. So he was in the movie, and we shot in East Hampton and Amagansett and Southampton. So for the summer. So how bad was that? Like,
Right.
Certainly not.
It was outstanding.
I've been looking for a job like that all my life.
I know, me too. In fact, I'm actually going to go and work, stocking a 7-Eleven shelves in Southampton next summer.
At this point, all right. So now you're working as a second. Did you see an absolute career path?
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. All right.
I mean, from literally, as I said, from the day that I saw Michael Hausman on that ladder giving directions,
Yeah.
where I wanted to end up. So being a second was a path.
Cool.
I mean, I did work as a second assistant director, and then I moved up to being a key second assistant. And life as an AD is always, has been for me anyway, in platforms. Like I was happy to be a second and watch key seconds who had a lot of experience navigating between the camper land where the motorhome base camp and the set and how they did that, and I was very respectful of that. And then when
What
I became key
what made
second,
a great? Well, okay. What made a great key second?
um, the ability to communicate, the ability to make sure that they were the filter, the ability to make sure that the communicate. Remember, this is back in the '80s. This is way before everybody had computer. I mean, we had to send the call sheet to the office.
When did you make the leap from second to first?
1992 or three. It was the last movie that I did as a second was a torturous disaster of a movie named Billy Bathgate.
Oh,
And
oh yes, yes, yeah. Billy. Oh gosh. Ugh.
yeah, that was it for me. When I finished that movie, I said, I'm gonna have to just now only I have to make the jump. I can't keep writing call sheets and spending half my day on a phone with people who don't understand. I need to be running the show. And that was when I decided, 1992 or three. I can't remember exactly what the date was, but that was.
Okay,
And
our podcast is called "How Not to Make a Movie." So clearly, you are saying that Billy Bathgate is an example of how not to make a movie. Do tell.
yeah, well,
What did they fuck up?
the movie, that particular movie had an incredible amount of personalities, and the personalities were very, very obvious. It wasn't like,
Who were
some.
some of the names? It was so long ago.
So this is 20, 30 years ago, right?
No, no.
So Dustin Hoffman was the star. Nicole Kidman was a budding star. She was coming up. There was a young guy named Lauren Dean who was cast for some reason. Why? I don't really
I remember Lauren Dean. Huh.
know. But we had a very, very complicated script that required a lot of stuff, and
Who wrote the script?
Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe or Tom Stoppard? I think it was Tom Stoppard. Excuse me.
Stuff. All right. So a
So,
very literate script.
and the cameraman was again one of the greats. I got lucky to work with Nestor Almendros. Unfortunately, that was his last movie, and he was beginning to go blind.
Oh,
So things took a little longer
oh.
than they should have. But
Who was directing?
I'm sorry,
Who was directing?
Robert Benton. This was when Hoffman was really sort of at his acting peak. So the whole movie was about Dustin Hoffman and what he was doing and when he was doing, and it should have been because of him they got the movie made. But it was one of those things where we were working with Disney at the time, and Disney was like, when we handed in the first schedule, we said this schedule, it's 99 to 100 days of shooting. We were shooting in 3 states, 4 cities in 3 states, and moving the whole company back and forth and blah. And they freaked out. They were shooting Dick Tracy with Warren Beatty at the time, so they were kind of shell shocked.
Yeah.
And
Double whammy. Whoa.
yeah, and
Jeez.
so cut to 112 days of principal photography later, right? Seriously, that we wrapped principal photography after 112 days of shooting.
Oh man.
We then went back 3 months later and did another like 16 or 18 days of shooting, and then went back after that and did a couple of days of pickups. So I think the aggregate was like 150 days of photography on the movie.
And it's
And
not a good movie.
no, it's boring as hell, and it came from a great novel, so it should have been really good. But oh well. So that was how not to make a movie. Truly, it blew apart the relationship between Robert Benton and Dustin Hoffman, which was sad to see, because it happened in front of everybody. They ended up hating each other.
Wow.
So I don't even know if they've ever reconciled.
Well,
Yeah.
hey, if there's any, Gil has never reconciled with Dennis Miller. So,
Okay.
so there's that. So all right. So you made the leap to
Yeah.
first. What was your first time as first?
Actually, it was doing some of the reshoots on Billy Bathgate, and
Huh.
when the production guy from Disney called me, he actually said to me, he actually said, "Listen, nobody else is available. Can you step in and do these?"
Hey, whatever works.
And it was like, yeah, nothing like a slap on the back there, buddy. I appreciate that.
Right.
So, but that's true. Actually, my first job as a first AD was on a little tiny movie that David Hemmings directed up in his hometown of in Ketchum, Idaho, and I'm trying to remember it changed names a couple of times. I think the name of it ended up being Dark Horse, and it was like an 18-day shoot. And the guy who I seconded for on Billy Bathgate, one of the great classic first ADs of the 20th century and part of the 21st century, a guy named Brian Cook, who was Stanley Kubrick's AD for many, many years.
Hmm.
One of the great classic shooting first ADs,
Mm-hmm.
called me up one day and he said, called me from London, and he said, my friend Hemmings is shooting this movie. Can you go and do it with him? And I said, sure. And, an hour later, Hemmings called me and we talked. And like a week later, I was on a plane and I went out there and I went and shot it. And that was the first job.
How
And
did you find working with David Hemmings? We had an experience. He did an episode of Tales from the Crypt. And we'll compare notes.
I love the guy.
Yeah.
He was smashed out of his mind.
Yeah.
All
Well, that's consistent.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Those notes line up.
But I adored him. He couldn't, even though he was plastered all the time, and you could smell him from 50 feet away, which was too bad. But I will tell you that, even though he was drunk, he was probably a better director than 75% of the people that I have worked with in my entire career.
Hmm.
He just knew what was right, what was wrong, where to go, where to put the camera, what to say to the actors, even if they had to like hold their hand in front of their nose because they couldn't stand his breath. But he was great, and he was really great to me. I mean, had he done another movie as a director after that, I think we probably would have worked together again.
Cool.
It was a great experience. We worked our asses off. We basically worked 7 days a week. It was a small crew, maybe 35 people or something like that. And he was a gem to work with. And I enjoyed every single minute of it.
Among the features that you first did was American Beauty.
Yeah.
And that you came on to a little after it had started. They were having trouble?
Yeah, a couple of days into it. Yes. What had happened was I was shooting a mini series with a director and a couple of producers when they were prepping the movie. And the line producer called me, and he wanted me to meet with Sam Mendes, who was the director of American Beauty, he had never directed a movie before. The script it was the first script ever written by Alan Ball. Alan Ball was a work for hire writer at the time. He was not the guy that created 6 Feet Under and
Right.
Dexter, all these other things that he's done. So here is this young English guy, Sam Mendes. He's got 2 big hits on Broadway that he's preparing road companies for, and flying back and forth between New York and LA, like never sleeping. It was amazing. I mean, that this guy wasn't falling down. So the line producer called me up and he said, come in and meet with Sam. So I did. And we spent 2 hours talking, and we talked mostly about theater and actors and theater, not really about the job as a first assistant director or anything like that. But we hit it off, and I left there, and he called me on my cell phone, and afterwards, and he said, I would really love to hire you. And I said, well, I'm on this other project until this time, and it's rare that a director picks up the phone and makes those calls. Usually you get an assistant or the producer or somebody else, but it's rare that the director actually does that. Several weeks go by and I hear again, and Mendes calls me while I'm shooting. And he says, listen, I would love to hire you, but the studio is really pushing somebody else. And I said, look, I want to thank you for these phone calls. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate them. But you shouldn't walk into that movie, your first movie in Hollywood, with a target on your back. And if the studio is pushing somebody, I think that you should fight for the people that you desperately need creatively in your head, which turned out to be his production designer, his editor, and a cameraman named Conrad Hall, who was one of the great cinema, who won the Academy Award for American Beauty as well, who is a genius, who helped make that movie what it was. And I said, go fight for those guys. And if something works out between you and I, great. And thanks for the call. And you're a great guy. And I really appreciate it. So on it goes. I'm in the middle of things. A couple of months later, about 6 weeks, actually a month and a half, about 6 weeks later, I get a phone call from the line producer again. Are you available? You're shooting. Yes. Are you available to come to, it was a Friday afternoon. Are you available Friday night to come to the set and meet with Sam and I and the studio and DreamWorks? And I said, sure. And so I did, and I went that evening, and they hid me in a camper to keep me away from everybody. And I met with Sam and the guys from the studio, and they said, we're making a change, and we would like to have you come aboard. And what do you need to come aboard with? And I told them, I said, I need my team. I need the people that I know that will deliver the job as I describe it to them. And I got to work all weekend and for several weekends with Sam to make sure I understand what it is that he needs and what it is he wants. Because I literally am going to step from Friday night shooting something else into Monday morning, taking over the set with basically no knowledge. So,
and taking over the set being the operative words.
Yeah. So,
running that set, and really that is what the first does. That is what the first does.
Yeah. And so I did, and we made the deal, and it was all fine, and we went forward, and they really did. The DreamWorks guys were really great. I mean, they supported us, and they supported the transition and everything else. And it was really good, and it was a tough show to shoot because Kevin Spacey, who played the lead, won the Oscar for it. He had commitments. He had a hard out date. So the original shooting schedule that they had approved that we were supposed to adhere to was never going to happen. It was they gave the movie 40 days. And it was never going to happen. And they gave me all this paperwork, and I called them up on Sunday night, and I said, I want to tell you something, guys. Unless you start ripping pages out and somebody comes in and tells the director that he can't do this or that or the other thing, which is not going to be me, we're not going to make this. We're not making a 40-day schedule. And we didn't. And we still got Kevin Spacey out in plenty of time for him to do his West End appearance in London. And then Sam Mendes took the movie back to London and, cut it. And there you have it. It's really one of the great memorable films in the last 50 years. It's really an amazing piece of work. I actually went to go see a screening of Empire of Light, the latest film that Mendes did at the Directors Guild.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to talk to him for about 10 minutes after the movie. It was great. I mean, I hadn't seen him in 20 years.
Wow.
And that was really cool. And it was really like he saw me walking down the aisle in the theater at the DGA, and it was really fun. I mean, his face lit up and he went, "You haven't changed." And I said, "You have. You're grayer than I remember." And he said, "Yes, and I'm fatter too." And I said, "I'm fatter than you are. So let's not go to that level. Let's do something else." So, and we're actually writing each other.
Great.
Uh,
Good. Hey, it's good to be back in touch with old friends.
yeah, and working with Sam was really great. Like that was a tremendous experience for me because working with a theater director in the film, even though Sam had always been like a movie guy in his head, he'd never done a movie before.
Sure.
So,
Sure. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, sure.
the conceptual difference is astonishing
Yeah.
from what he recognized was great. And but what was really fantastic about that experience for me was watching him talk to Kevin and Annette Bening because and Chris Cooper
Mm-hmm.
because the communication about the work that they were doing, that these actors were putting up, was amazing. I don't think I've ever really worked with a director who was that like into the actors and what they were doing and all that. And Sam was absolutely there, and he was amazing.
Would you say that because he came out of the theater?
Yeah, very much.
Well, you know, and also that movie was a great transition because in a lot of ways that was a play.
Yeah,
Uh, and so he was able to concentrate on character, I'm sure, character relationship and
Sure,
emotion
sure.
as
Yeah, you can
opposed
do that
to,
as a play. Yeah.
yeah,
very much.
Yeah.
yeah.
And there. I mean, I remember at one point there was the famous. It's actually called the couch scene where
Yeah.
he's lying on a couch drinking a beer, and she comes home, and there's this whole big confrontation about what's going on, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
end of the
Yeah.
very romantic. And she says, "Don't, Lester, don't spill the beer on the couch." And he flips out and he goes, "It's just a couch. It's
Yeah.
a couch." So that we rehearsed the day that was like the third or fourth day that I had taken over the show. And that morning, Sam had come to me when we were scheduled to shoot that scene. And he said, "Just so you know, I'm going to rehearse this scene until it's ready to shoot." And I sort of swallowed for a minute, and I went like, I think that's a red flag. Like I should be aware there's a hidden message in all of that.
Mhm.
So literally we closed the doors, and he and the script supervisor walked into the set, not me. I was outside. 4.5 hours later, literally 4.5 hours later, the line producer is having a heart attack on the street. The
Sure.
entire crew is now they're kicking a football around and doing, because there's nothing going on. Nobody's doing anything.
Hey.
So 4.5 hours after call, Sam opens the door and we bring everybody in. The first thing he does is we turn all the furniture in the room around. We move everything around to what he blocked with the actors. So
Mhm.
that was, and then he showed us what the scene was. So we didn't shoot anything before lunch. We didn't even light anything before lunch.
We had time.
And meanwhile, I mean, there are people who are pulling whatever hair they had left out of their heads in the trailers. So we lost a good 2/3 of a day that day. That was when we started falling behind.
Yeah. Wow.
And it happened, but the scene in the movie is memorable. I remember being at the after party at the Directors Guild Awards when we won that night, and everybody was having a great time. Steven Spielberg was sitting with Sam, and I wandered over with my date at the time, and we talked for a little bit, and Spielberg said, at the end of the day, I know you guys went way over budget and way over schedule, but at the end of the day, look at the movie. Look at the movie. Look how good that movie is.
Mhm.
And I mean, was it worth it at the end of the day? I've never worked for DreamWorks since. I don't know if
Yeah.
my name is headed over there, but I've never worked for them.
You could walk in the door and go, guys, but look at the movie.
I know.
What would you say, looking back, are your happiest experiences doing a feature? Are there any? At the end
Oh
of
yeah.
the day?
I would actually, I will tell you that I think that my my favorite experiences in general have been shooting these big. I've done a number of big miniseries over the years, like really large scale miniseries in foreign countries and other places.
You just did one a little while ago.
Yeah, those have really been like amazing for me. Like I went and did in 2001. I was in New Zealand for 7 months, doing a mini series over there, and it was one of the great experiences that I've had in my life. It was just fantastic.
What was that?
It was called the thing itself was pretty shitty, called Superfire. Um, but the
It was called Super Fire.
Superfire, yeah, it was a bit. There's a condition in forest fires where that is actually called a superfire, which is when fires collide and the heat makes them explode and become exponentially bigger.
As we've had here in the West, of course.
Yeah. So it was a movie about that. Unfortunately, the casting wasn't great. Um, the director was okay, good guy, not very on it. Constantly got overwhelmed by the size and scope of what we were doing. But being in New Zealand, and it was right after they had shot the first Lord of the Rings. So there are all of these amazing people that were available that have become superstars in the film industry everywhere. So we worked with an incredible crew, like an incredible crew of great people.
And were you in Wellington?
No, we were in Auckland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we operated out of Auckland. It was just a spectacular experience. I mean, I had never been to that part of the world, and
I envy you. Sounds
no, it was phenomenal. I mean, I had an absolutely fantastic time. I mean, it was tough. Every day there were challenges and all of that, like there always are. But at the end of the day, all the people there wasn't a bad egg or a bad sheep among them, and it was spectacular. I spent 5 months on Malta doing a version for the USA Network of the Helen of Troy story,
huh.
and that was unbelievable. I mean, it was the you don't have enough time on this podcast for me to go into the hundreds of crazy stories. We basically shot, with people from 16 or 17 different countries. We shot for 68 days or 69 days or something, and it was absolutely massively crazy. I mean, but again, like an experience like none other. Like living in Malta was for 5 months was unreal.
No, I'll bet. I'll bet. I'll bet.
And I got another, a couple of years later, I went to Rome and I lived in Rome for 5 months, and I shot a miniseries called, and it wasn't a miniseries. I'm sorry. It was a short order. It was a 6 episode short order, something called Empire, which again, 44 BC, Roman togas, things, like stuff. And again, the living experience over there. I lived 3 blocks away from the Vatican. I was around the corner from the Vatican.
You could always drop it on the Pope.
Yeah.
It's always convenient to be near the Vatican.
Yeah. It was great. I mean, so some of these experiences that I have had, even though they weren't big movies, they were big TV things. Recently, last year, not 22, 21, I was over, I got called and I went over to Budapest, and I did the action and battle units for this show that's on the air now called Halo from the game. That was great, amazing. And Budapest had always been sort of on my bucket list of a place that I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And so out of the blue, one day this guy calls me and he says, "I'm calling from Halo in Budapest, and we want to find out your availability." And it sounded exactly like a friend of mine in New York, and I thought it was a joke. And I said, "Listen, Scott, stop screwing around, will you please? Because I'm available and I'm interviewing and trying to get a job." And the guy said, "This isn't Scott. This is Hatsu from Budapest, and we're calling to find out can you speak with the director? And it's like, oh, this is a real job. Great. Yeah, I'm ready. So I went to Budapest for 10 weeks and shot the biggest things that I've ever shot from a stunt and special effects point of view that I have ever done in my life. And it was amazing. It was absolutely great. So, I've had these experiences throughout my career that have just been amazing. I've shot in 38 of the 50 states. Um, and it's really been, it's really been pretty great.
These days, you've turned more to producing as opposed to working for other people. You're trying to be the man.
As much as I love firsting, which I do, I would do it if I could work the way that I'd like to work all the time. I would work all the time, but I can't, and it is difficult. I mean, I've had that horrible thing where I went once a couple of years ago. I went and interviewed with a director who was about 34 years old, and we went in and I sat down. We had a cup of coffee, and it was a nice talk. And about an hour into the interview, it was pretty clear that the interview was over, but we really connected. And the guy said, "Listen, I have to tell you, I think you're really fantastic and your experience speaks for itself, but I just don't think that I can hire you." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I said, what do you think is the problem?" And he said, "Well, I think I would probably feel like I was answering to my father." And I kind of took a step back and said, "Well, I get it. And if it doesn't work for you, I I'm not going to beg you for a job. I'm not, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable. So if you need somebody who's your age, or somebody that
Doesn't remind you of your dad in some fashion, where you think you're going to be deferring the whole time.
You can't really fight that. There's nothing you can say. If somebody challenged me on my resume or my abilities as an AD that had nothing to do with age or anything else, that'd be one thing. Then I feel that I could sit there and go, well, let me explain how and why and all of that. But if somebody says, "Hey, I'd rather work with somebody my own age," I don't know what to. At that point, you go, "Well, good luck, and I hope I wish you all the success in the world."
You can only help people so much.
You asked me at the very beginning of this sort of what makes a great assistant director. Well, my job is to make the director's life every day with the actors and the cameraman as easy as possible. That's my, and if nobody ever said thank you at the end of the day, that would be okay. If I deliver what I say I can deliver with the tools that they give me, and accomplish the day in the right amount of time, and everybody walks away going, "We did a great day's work. That's fantastic." And they don't come up to me personally and say, "Thank you for organizing this." That's okay. I can live with that. That's not a problem. My job, my description of my job in my head is to allow the director, the creative head of the team, to be able to do his or her job and get the best performance for the actors, and have the actors be incredibly comfortable, and continue on from there. As creative as my job can be, depending on trying to figure out problems or scenarios or situations, the driving force of my job is logistics and delivering that on a daily basis, and being able to deliver what I say that I think we can, and also being very transparent. And there's a lot of people out there that aren't, and I'm not one of those people.
But I think that candor is the reason why people trust you.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. There, and Gil, you know this from dealing with studio guys, all your life and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who have a really hard time with that. They don't.
Yeah, I know.
They don't want to hear that. They just want to see you say, "Yep, yes, absolutely, okay, got it, thank you very much," and off you go. And then the cost reports come in, or the hot costs, or the production reports, and you're falling behind and you're not making your days, and you're in the 14 and a half hour days, and somebody got hurt, and all and they're going, well, how come? Why did that happen? And you get to say, hey, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you we couldn't finish this in 3 days. Right. We needed 5. I said that, and here are the notes to prove it. And you said no. Just right. Like, I mean, I'll go back to what I said before about Billy Bathgate. We told them it was 99 or 100 days. And they said, absolutely no fucking way will you ever get that from Disney. So literally,
how many days did they get in the end?
Almost 150, but the day that we went to day 90 of 75, I remember calling the guys at Disney. I was the second AD, and I'm filling out all this paperwork. And I said, do you want me to stop calling it day 8 or 90 of 75? Can we forget that topic on the thing? Because it looked kind of stupid, don't you think? You know, I mean, I'll do whatever you want. You guys make the call. Tell me what you want me to do. Oh, well, you know, yeah. Okay, get rid of it.
Be a negative number.
That's like, okay, we told, you know, we this is what we said to you a long time ago, and you didn't want to hear about it. So, and nobody addressed the problem. So, okay, so now there's no longer day X out of X on the call sheet. Okay, great. So.
How not to make a movie.
Exactly.
See you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.